Coming up, the weekend that was for the Brooklyn Nets was not very good. 2 losses to the crosstown New York Knicks, a big performance from Mikal Bridges, everything you did or did not want to see, depending on what agenda you're on right now for the Brooklyn Nets. We dive into it all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here, the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms, and let you know that you can keep starting your seasons with big returns on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll receive a $150 bonus bets if your winning first $5 bet hits. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And Doug, here we are, bright and early, Monday morning, realizing that a rough stretch of games we said were on the schedule for the Brooklyn Nets went the way we thought it was going to, but even a little bit worse maybe after 2 games against the Knicks over the weekend.
Yeah, if we walk it back to Friday night, I mean, that was the game where, obviously we're coming here Monday morning. That was the game where Nets fans, I think, probably really dialed it up into they're going to go into MSG. It's the NBA Cup. It's, the new courts. It's all this stuff. There's got a little story to it. And the Nets absolutely hang with them the whole time, to the point where they probably should have and could have won the game, right? Allowing Brunson a little bit too much space on the 3 that sends them ahead. And then Schroeder trying to get to the rim. I know some people hated that. I don't mind it totally. If you have a path to a layup at the end of the game, I think you just have to take it, even though it seemed like a little bit maybe out of control. And then Bridges, of course, gets the block at the end. So I think that Sunday's
the guy
game,
who on, by the way, on Friday's episode, I spent a little bit of time talking about how, he's just not as athletic as you need a number 2 to be. He kind of lacks these certain skill sets. And then, of course, he sweeps in for the block. But yeah, continue.
Well, hilariously, like that game too, just on the Bridges point, like he was kind of getting roasted on defense too. It wasn't too different than what we had seen. They eventually had to switch OG onto Cam Thomas because Cam was just, was literally making everything. We'll talk about Cam here shortly. But that Friday game really had like I would say like the full Nets Knicks appeal of a little bit of a rivalry here. There's a little extra stakes, right? Because the in-season stuff. It's Bridges' first game against the Nets, and he clearly was bought into wanting to rewrite some of the narrative there because he was getting into it, and that spilled over to Sunday too, where he was talking to the bench, got some stuff talking. Actually, not something we saw tons from him in his time in Brooklyn, but he specifically had it dialed up, I think, for this weekend.
I will say, because we're gonna cover the Cam Thomas performance on Friday night, talk about Nicholas Claxton and what not having him around for games like these means. But the post game, when Cam Johnson was asked after the second game on Sunday about what it's like to have Mikal Bridges throw in the 3 sign at you and wiggling his head, he goes like, I know those guys are boys and they're buddies, so it's not like I think there's any animosity. But the way Cam Johnson responded to it, he flat out was like, yeah, it's annoying. It's really annoying. And it wasn't funny. He wasn't being cute about it. He was like, it was annoying. And I think like there's something obviously we always talk about with athletes this level and the competitive nature of it. It was like, yeah, not a fan of him in season. You know what I mean? Like you could just tell that, hey, I'm out there to compete. And this, when he's on my team waggling his head, it's one thing. When he's doing it to me and my bench going down the court, it feels very different.
Well, I got to tell you, Adam and I have been doing this for years and years now. I mean, 47 years on the podcast or something like that together, rounding down. And Adam knows I'm not susceptible to I'm really not susceptible to like the player personality piece. Really, like I just don't care. Like it just doesn't bother. There's a few that kind of annoy me. It's the only thing that really bothers me is like intense flopping, because I think that is like sort of a stain on the game. Other than that, I really could care less if guys talk trash or all this stuff. Even I was annoyed by the Bridges thing. I was watching it.
You're doing it now. You got Doug riled up.
And I'm rolling my eyes. And I am not a candidate to really fall victim to this stuff on a game-to-game basis. I really don't care. I was the one that's like, hey, wish Bridges well. Even I was like, come on with this. I had it. So I'm not surprised that you would hear from other players. I'm sure other fans absolutely couldn't stand it, where he basically sleepwalks through a season with the Nets. Now, again, they get a good haul for him, so fine. But he sleepwalks through I would say half a season at least, where he just doesn't do anything on the offensive end. And then to have him talking trash and waving the celly out there and sort of stomping in the thing. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Maybe we could just quietly have a good game and like that, and that'll be it. And again, this is me who just never cares about this stuff.
And it's funny too, because in the post game, they asked Mikal Bridges, anything you wish you had done differently when your time in Brooklyn? And he said more wins. Well. He did. You know, the weird thing, he put up he did the sell and he went, play better, and then kind of waddled his way away from camera, which I thought was an interesting choice for a post-game interview. No, but he says, "Oh, I wish we had won more games," and he references, "I still have people in the front office and guys over there that I like, that I'm still fond of." And again, this is always classic. It's always easier to take the high road about something when you're coming off of back-to-back wins and when you're not on that team anymore. You know what their agenda is. But yeah, it's funny that you said that. We all know, or if you listen to the podcast, that you're not that kind of necessarily fan around sports, because that's the same thought that I had while I was watching it last night. I was like, this guy, like, and you know what it also reminded me of right now in this moment is, if you remember when they went back and played Phoenix, it was Devin Booker last season who was giving Mikal the celly after he was knocking them down. And I remember back then being like, oh, that's annoying. When the other team is mocking your guy's celebration, that's annoying. And now you kind of get a taste of it going the other way as well. So
did he say something like, I wish I had averaged more than 11 points a game over my last 7 as a Brooklyn Net in 27 minutes, and maybe something more than 11.6
specifically, but
11.6 points and 2.7. 11.6 points and 2.7 rebounds over in 28 minutes a game over his last 7 as a net. This sounds too much like we're crying over the thing. I in general, we really don't care, but it was mostly that if this is the Nets, who have very few storylines this year, like the Nets have storylines, but they're not of the normal ilk, right? Like usually it's let's win games, let's over exceed expectations, which the Nets have done. I think that's totally it. But this is part of sort of the Nets story. And it's really actually been one of these things that's been part of the Nets story over the last 5 years, which is they've had a lot of guys, big names, move on from the team, right? Like they just, the sort of the theme of this run over the last 4 years has been, clearly the huge flame out of the big three, but more about the guys who have just moved on that the Nets were at one point built around. KD, Kyrie, Harden, Mikal, like these guys have all left, and they've all gone on and frankly done a lot better than maybe not Harden, but they've done, well, he made it further in the playoffs though. And so that's just been a theme. So the Bridges thing just sort of continues to cement this thing that we've been talking about for years now.
Coming up here in a second, some additional thoughts on things like how you root for former players on your team, but also the wasted performance of Cam Thomas on Friday night, what happened in game number 2 on Sunday, and at a high level, the reality of missing key players like Nicholas Claxton in games like these. We get into that in just one moment.
All right, let you know this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. This month's all about gratitude. Look, along with the people that we're shouting out here, like I'm talking to Adam every single day. I'm talking to my wife every single day. There's people that we can unload on. We can just tell, kind of shoot straight, show it how it really is. We also want to make sure we don't make sure we thank enough. That's ourselves. Sometimes it's hard to remind ourselves. We're trying to do the best and make sense of everything. It's a crazy world. This stuff isn't easy. You got to look inward at times to make sure you're doing the best for yourself, because only when you do the best for yourself can you go out and give it to the rest of the world. This is where BetterHelp can come in. They can help you focus on things that are bothering you, focus on things that are going well, focus on just the things that you want to just work on, coping skills, setting boundaries, empowering you to be the best version of yourself. BetterHelp has you covered along the way here. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's totally online. It's designed to be convenient. It's flexible. It's totally suited to your schedule. All you got to do, you just fill out a brief questionnaire. You're going to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time. It's no additional charge. They want to make sure BetterHelp is working with you and for you. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about obviously the double dose for the New York Knicks over the weekend. We'll get into in a minute the tank and how this has kind of set us right back on the path that we thought the Brooklyn Nets were going to be on. A couple of quick things. One, there has to be some type of irony that the first former player that really gets Doug and I riled up, not Kevin Durant, not Kyrie Irving, not James Harden, No, it's Mikal Bridges, which is
Well, can I say one thing about that? I'm sorry to cut you off. The difference there is all those other guys played awesome right up until the end.
I was going to say, but they did their jobs. Yeah, you're not going to rattle off the stat lines of Kevin Durant at the back end of his time with the Nets where you go, well, if only Kevin Durant wasn't averaging 11 points over 34 minutes. No, it's Kevin Durant was amazing, and it didn't work out here, and it fell apart in spectacular fashion. So, yes, obviously there's that part of it. And then I'll just also real quick say, whatever you think about Cam Johnson, that post game, and I know he had a rough game on, he's had some rough games mixed in here. I want to get back to Friday night where to follow the fan base following that game was a journey unto itself. But I find Cam Johnson to be a much more root-worthy kind of candidate now after you come out of a game like that. The response from Mikal Bridges and just it seems like, hey, by the way, I'm still here, right? Mikal's gone, got a haul for him. I'm still here and I'm still a part of it. Switching back though to that Friday night game and the Cam Thomas performance, just a great example of when you're not quite a good enough team and you get a really good performance from your best player. It's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow to not get those wins. Even in a season where you want to tank, you also want to reward games like that. And the Nets couldn't get across the line on Cam Thomas's game.
Yeah, it was really clear early that he had it going. The first quarter, he was completely off the chain. I think he had 19 in the first quarter. And you can sometimes tell with him when he starts cooking early that it's just going to be something that lasts. He just has flamethrower sort of just microwave stuff in him. And when he's dialed into scoring, there's actually at that point, very few people in the game that can do it as well as him. That's not really hyperbole. He just is a consummate scorer. And again, there's just not many guys in the league that have 40-point game upside in them, kind of every night. He just doesn't hit it every night, but he has it in him every night. And that game he was so dialed in early. He was making 16 for 22 from the field. I mean, just totally ridiculous. 7 for 10 from 3. Some of them were contested. They had to take Bridges off of them. They just kind of shoot Anunoby on him. It didn't really matter. It was one of these things where kind of everyone out. They just needed a little bit more from anybody else. It was really honestly 2 points. They just needed anything else from somebody here, to get them over the hump. They didn't get much from the bench in terms of scoring. No one else hit 20 points.
More than 4
and
points.
It wasn't
it's whatever. It's wherever you can find it. Wherever you can find it.
Yeah, exactly. They just needed something else. So it's always a shame to waste those because the thing that follows Cam, unfortunately, is this idea of a lot of points, empty calories, right?
Yeah.
That, it doesn't lead to wins. And sometimes wins are so binary where it sort of ignores context and other stuff. And it's a stat that floated around forever was their record when he scored over 40 points, which I just think is so stupid because it's some of these close games. It could have, Brunson doesn't hit the 3 and all of a sudden it's now they have a better record when he scores 40 points. It's very dumb, I think, to think of things that way. And it sucks when he scores 43 on incredible efficiency and they don't get the win. So it's been sort of a theme for him over time. He's clearly, been able to step it up a big time at MSG. And it's just, the losses don't really sting because, in the end that we want a good draft pick, but these are ones where I don't know, if they fall half a percentage point in the draft lottery because they get the W on a Cam 40 burger in MSG, I think everyone would be on board for rooting for that. So it's a shame when it doesn't get done.
Yeah, and then you follow it up too to push these two games together over the weekend. Before we talk about it, I actually mentioned point percentages inside of the odds. It's amazing how one weekend can change the outlook for where the Nets stand in the draft order right now. But you go into the second game of this series and you get Cam Thomas on something that he's done a few times here, where it's been pretty efficient. 33 minutes, 4 of 11 from the field only. Sorry, I said efficiency incorrectly. 16 points is what was that part of those efficient games when he's had lower volume and still been productive. To have him come back and go 4 of 11, which is all right, only 4 from beyond the arc, 1 goes down, 7 to 10 at the line. He actually did his work by getting to the basket in the second game here. 5 rebounds, 3 assists. The hard part about this game was that you look back at it and go, well, yes, they had that run in the fourth quarter where they're down double digits and they make that push and you're within 6 or 7 at one point there, maybe even a little bit less. And you go, okay, maybe they're going to get over the line. Did not feel the same way as the first game on Friday night, mostly because you didn't have Cam Thomas cooking the way he was in the previous game. And without having that guy, now again, mind meld these two games together. It's why when you go back to Friday night, some people had the problem. The attempted running layup from Dennis Schroeder to finish that game that could have been the win. That's worked for him a lot in the early portion of the season. It didn't work in that game. It was Mikal Bridges with the block. And in that moment, when you have a 43-point performance from Cam Thomas, I don't care. Like, best basketball play, if you think it's going to be an effective way to do it as the defense hones in on Cam, fine. But you'd like to have that ball maybe in the hands of Cam Thomas in that game, because guess what? Turn around on Sunday, it wasn't the same game script. Karl-Anthony Towns is back. We'll talk about him, right? Like, it just had a totally different feel. And that's the part where you would sacrifice the percentage points in the draft to get the feel-good value of Cam Thomas, 45 points, Nets win the ball game at the buzzer.
Yeah, again, like the Schroeder thing, they have no timeouts. It's the heat of the moment. He has a downhill lane. Like, I know it was a good recovery block by Mikal. He got right past them. Like, it was just, and he had a chance to kind of give it to Cam. They would have lost a precious second or two of momentum if he were to have passed the ball right there. Again, it wasn't drawn up. So I just don't think it's hard to really bag on him. Again, Schroeder's been like arguably their best.
We don't talk about it like that, right? You only talk about it because it didn't work. Like, that's always the way that it is with these things.
And Schroeder's been arguably their best player this year, and so it's like him and Cam probably. I mean, I think they have a couple of good guys that are putting good performances, but so I don't really mind that from Cam though. I know switching to this Sunday game, I really wasn't surprised. Like, after they don't win on Friday, you could kind of probably feel like the deflated aspect of just not really. The Knicks were like, okay, we can't take them. We can't really allow this to happen again. And they clearly just took a different path. I know Towns was in there and he gave the Nets all kinds of problems when they're starting Simmons at the 5 and it's Cat at the 5. And he goes for, 26 and 15 and 6 assists and just looks like he's just getting anything he wants. It was a different feel too, to have that there. But with Cam too, they also took a defensive strategy that just really limited his ability to get anywhere. Like, putting bigger wings on him during the game just is going to make it so tough for him. They threw doubles at him. Again, that's going to be hard. When you're throwing doubles at him and like the outlet is Ben Simmons, who you know is never going to shoot. I hate to put on Simmons here totally, but they just know they don't have to, they don't get punished at all. Cat's interior defense is terrible, but the Nets don't punish them at all by having Simmons at the 5. And they don't have any outs here, so whatever. Like, all these guys are hurt, but like the one place you can hurt the Knicks is they just can't really defend the interior. Towns is not a good interior defender. Nets just didn't have anyone to put any pressure on him at all. And that kind of makes things easy. And then it makes it really easy to take away Cam. That's why you see him only get up 11 shots.
Yeah, this is why I think the rule in the NBA for the Nets this season is you don't play the same team twice, because I just feel like it's too much familiarity for the opposition. They get a big performance from Cam. They understand the adjustment. Nets were outscored in the paint 50-24 on Sunday in that matchup. Coming up here to close things out, though, who wasn't available for the Nets as Cat returned for the Knicks? No Nicholas Claxton. Mentioned Ben Simmons there. There's just clearly a breakdown in value at that position and why it's so critical for the Nets to play at full strength in basically every game if they want to win. We'll do that to close things out in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over on FanDuel. No better time to get in the action right now than on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You can bet $5. New customers can bet $5. You can get $150 in bonus bets if you win. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app is going to give you everything you need to place live bets on the NBA, on the NFL. It's all in one place. They got the season futures, too. You're not going to get this because you're going to have to wait till the end of the season. Cam Thomas, plus 10,000 for NBA's most improved player, which I think is kind of a joke if you see some of the other guys that are around him here. Like, Walker Kessler and Cam Thomas at the same. I mean, what are we doing over here for FanDuel? Bump them up a little bit. Give us something to work with. It's all right. Let's take the longer odds. Take that from our friends over at FanDuel. No better time, like I said, to get in the action. You're going to get those $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 real money bet over at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we close out today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about the weekend that was for the Brooklyn Nets, do want to get into not having Nicholas Claxton there, but because it also involves ragging on Ben Simmons, that's something that we find ourselves doing because of his play. It has nothing to do with us not liking him as a person. It's just that he's not good enough to be helping the Nets win basketball games. I will note, as we mentioned in the last segment, after this weekend, the Brooklyn Nets now will be getting the 6th pick as it currently stands from the Milwaukee Bucks, and then they'll pick 7th with their own pick. And the way that it was warped through the prism of the East was kind of sloppy to start the year. So even being around 500 meant you were in the playoff picture. Now the Nets are out of the playoff picture. Now they're vaulted into the top 10 spot. And, 2 games later, and by the way, we talked about the 6-game stretch, right? Where we said, oh, how could they play? Or a 7-game stretch, excuse me. And you and I said 2 and 5 would be a success story. They only went 1 and 6. And I think this stretch of games is the reminder that even if the Nets made no moves, and I'm not saying they won't, but if they kept this team exactly as it's constituted, you're always going to run into 5 or 6 games in a row like this that help reset where you are in that hierarchy. So that's why rooting for some of those wins, those feel-good moments, you should be all in on those because these runs are going to knock them back down.
Yeah, and frankly, I mean, as these things start to smooth out over time, which I think we always thought was going to happen, I don't think this team was ever like at risk of like making the playoffs or anything like that, even with a few wins. And they still play hard, and I think that's going to happen. You mentioned Claxton, just not having Claxton here for some time. That's probably one of their biggest losses. Look, again, we've talked about like their inability to probably withstand some guys not being able to be on the court. Claxton, I mentioned Schroeder's maybe their best player. You can make a case that Claxton he just played fewer minutes. Like he's got this third best plus, well, it's really second best plus minus on the team so far. He's the only guy who's like even close to being a real center, like a real NBA center, and which is something you clearly need. He's a great switch defender. He's a guy that can do, run pick and roll, pick and dive kind of stuff with Schroeder that's something that's been able to unlock parts of their offense. As long as he's not on the court, he got the epidural. Like as long as he's not on the court, the Nets are going to really struggle with any team that has any size at all. And I don't think they care, right? I don't think it doesn't really matter. They're going to continue to put their best foot forward. But Claxton is like a bad loss for this team. If you're on the staying competitive piece, like they need him in a way because they just don't have anyone behind him. It's like same thing with Schroeder. It's like, when you come to the wings, it's like, if they lose Cam Johnson, it's like, you have some other wings here, right? You have other wings that can kind of get out there and do some of that stuff. With Schroeder, with Claxton, they just don't have anyone behind those guys that can do anything close to what they do on the court. And it's just a thin line between, good and tank here. And Claxton to me, actually represents like sort of like that idea. They just are clearly much worse when he doesn't play.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned about on an individual level of replacing him. So you don't have, just to clarify, lower back strain for Nicholas Claxton. 1 week, they said minimum. And guess what? Let me tell you a story about anything to do with the back and players that have been on the Brooklyn Nets recently and just having some concerns around it. And in a tank season, wouldn't anticipate that the Nets are going to do anything other than be overly cautious with when they bring him back on the floor. So he starts with the injury in the preseason and training camp, leads to him coming off the bench. Now he's finally up to speed, and then he ends up tweaking the back. So we'll see what'll be probably this upcoming weekend. You'll get some sense about the next following week and what his status is going to be. But you're right. And the reason why you don't have anyone in behind him is, and we can stay on Nicholas Claxton if you want, but it's just the contrast of him and Ben Simmons. Listen, Claxton's averaging a little over 8 points a game and a little over 7 rebounds a game in the early portion of the season, playing on restricted minutes. Ben Simmons didn't score on Sunday. Again, 8 assists mean nothing if you're not going to be scoring the basketball. And then defensively as well, like I just don't think, and we've said this before, even though Ben Simmons, so it's not to knock him, even though he has defensive versatility, even though there's other players that can do certain things, Noah Clowney can do a lot of things in a versatile way defensively. He can protect around the rim, but it's not the same type of defensive player that Claxton is. Claxton's been able to show over the last season and a half, barring the biggest of the biggest matchups, when we talk about the Rudy Goberts maybe of the world or the Anthony Davises, he can go and play above his weight class against the 5. If you had him on the court in Sunday's game against Karl Anthony Towns, trust me, it's going to be a very different outcome. Not whether or not Towns is still going to get his, but the ability to impact the way they want to run their offensive sets. It's a bummer. And I guess if you're worried about the tank, this is always the contrast. I want him back because same thing why if Schroeder went down, it negatively impacts the ability for players maybe to develop over the course of this season. I don't think Claxton rises to that level if he's not available, but you see how it hurts the consistency on the defensive end and then the ability to impact things offensively in a way that Ben Simmons is never going to do anymore for the Nets.
And they just need, in the modern NBA, you just need a center, especially if you have a point guard who can run pick and roll. I hate to make it simple, but it is simple. It's to some degree. Like there's certain plays in basketball that are hallmarks of pretty good offenses around certain teams. And if you have a point guard that can run pick and roll and you have a center that can get to the rim and get above the rim and understands it and has good body control and can finish there, like that's a plus EV play. And even if defenses know it's coming, and it just unlocks your, because not only that, it unlocks your shooters, it unlocks, spacing around them. And it's just not, this is kind of basketball 101. It is the reason why this play decades and decades and decades later, or this, not play, the system still is run by teams, because when it's done properly, when you can set a screen and you can roll to the basket, or, stop in the short roll, or just kind of like keep defenses on their heels, that is a play that works, right? There's only so many ways. There's only so many places to go on a basketball court. Like the basketball court's only so big with only so much room to go. And there's a reason that certain aspects of the game, sort of like from a geometric standpoint, still work if you have the right guys. Claxton is one of those guys. By the way, you need the other guy too. You need the other guy who can run that stuff. Like Claxton plus some of their other guards doesn't work as well. Claxton plus Schroeder does work. And not like you're going to do it for the whole game, but if you're just looking to keep if you're looking to keep yourself above water, right? Tread water, which is really where the Nets are, like be competitive, tread water. You're going to have to be able to do certain things on the court that are, I would just consider the basics, right? Like the Schroeder plus Claxton pairing plus 244 minutes plus 2.35 net rating, right? It's all worse when you switch out. It's worse when you just switch out one for the other or whatever. All the other combinations are worse. And so that's just a combo that's going to work geometrically, athletically, all this other stuff. And again, if he's hurt, he's hurt. It doesn't really matter. I'm just saying, like, they don't have anyone behind him that's anything close to what he does, right? Who's the next closest? They don't even have a single other guy that's really a center. Like, well, and that's just kind of where they are.
So, I mean, Day'Ron Sharpe, October 7th, 6 weeks to his return. That's the backlog date. So you're, starting to get into a conversation around hearing about him a little bit. Tomorrow, we'll talk about Trendon Watford, who came back, right? So there's some players coming back in. And I don't say any of those guys as, here's your replacement for Nicholas Claxton. It's why I mentioned Noah Clowney before. It's like, well, there's these different pieces of different players that work. It's why you mentioned Ben Simmons. But none of them, and Claxton is not a perennial all-star, right? He is not the perfect model of player. He also has his limitations on the offensive end, but they don't have, to your point, another guy that steps in and even gives you, in one player, give me 75 cents on the dollar of the value of Nicholas Claxton, 80 cents on the dollar. That's what you need, is the one-to-one, even if it's not as productive, close to. Because now instead what ends up happening is Jordi Fernandez will have to go in and say, well, how do I end up using 2 or 3 players to bring in the value that I need to get there if I want to have that success? And by the way, one closing note that I would have on this last game too, which this is also a staple of Thibodeau, but when you, or Thibodeau, should I say, when you go and look, remember, Nets, they come into this game, now they end up getting down to the gritty of it. Everybody plays. And I mean, everybody plays, even all the way down to Chu, who came in just for 1 minute of action here. There's a lot of guys that play the garbage time. But even beyond them, they still played 5 full guys off the bench for some amount of meaningful minutes. Keon Johnson played 11. For the New York Knicks, it was 8 guys deep. Starters who by the way, 4 out of 5 scored 20 points or more in this game. So it was, full onslaught offensively. And then you had Sims come in. He got the block on Schroeder in this one instead of Mikal Bridges. Payne played 17. You got 10 off the bench from Pacom as well. But that's the tight nature of being, when you're a really good team on paper, when your roster is tight, starters play a lot of minutes, especially in their style. You don't play a lot of bench guys. Nets need everybody. This is the journey, right? Takes a village. The Nets need everybody. And when one guy goes down, like Claxton, it's just hard to have someone else pick it up. And that's true of almost anybody when you look across this roster. Even if they lose Schroeder, you could even make the case, man, when guys like Dorian Finney-Smith went down, Zaire Williams is there to step up. Yeah. If Zaire Williams has the solid game, right? There's a variable there around what's the consistency in the replacement. Even though we know certain positions are far more redundant than others, you still ask the question, are they going to hit a baseline? Because a lot of these guys beyond the veterans do not have that in their track record, right? Zaire Williams can do it, hasn't done it consistently in his career, right? Keon Johnson has shown some flashes. You're not going to rely on him for 25, 30 minutes a game. So that's the difference here in roster construction. And we knew that coming in, but it's just like a reminder. I thought that Sunday's game was also a crystallizer of that. Hey, really good team, top-end talent. They don't need bench players to play a significant role. Nets are going to need that night over night if they want to stay competitive.
Yeah, look, they can't lose Schroeder because they don't have another really good functional point guard. They can't lose Claxton because they don't have another center. And they probably can't lose Thomas because they don't have anyone that can really like on ball create over long stretches in the game. And
Right.
after that, everyone else is probably pretty replaceable. But those three guys,
Win 3 out of your 5.
yeah, losing those guys just makes it a really, really tough uphill climb. All right, we're going to get more
0
into
points for Ben Simmons. I just want to reiterate that in this game. 0 points.
what's that?
0 points for Ben Simmons. I just want to make sure I drill that home. 0 points.
Yeah, just like he doesn't. I mean, 3 shots. He took 3 shots in 22 minutes. He had the same number of. He had twice as many turnovers and fouls as he did shots. Like, what are you gonna do? It's just not. It's not there. All right. On that note, we are going to get out of here. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to Locked On Nets, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, whatever, YouTube. You know, look, it's all free. It's all free. Just go hit subscribe, hit a like, give a 5-star review. If you're going to be less than 5 stars, don't bother. But just go over there, give 5 stars review. Frankly, just hit it and don't even listen. Just let it play. That's all that helps. It's all for free. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets.
You better believe it. Big shout out to Priscilla and the whole staff over at the Blue Moon, where I watched the Nets game on Friday night. What a lovely atmosphere, friends. But sometimes you get knocked down, but there's a lot more satisfaction climbing the ladder again when you've been knocked off. And that's a guy that I wouldn't really trust in Aaron Boone.
Who is it?
Aaron Boone, manager of the Yankees. Successfully failed to win a World Series.
I've said one of the all-time great poets after every single episode of this. And I'm going to keep it going. I'm going to keep it going to not,
if you want
to not break the streak. So but I say this very begrudgingly. One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball. Basketball.